Today's presentation will explain what ANPR, Automatic Number Plate Recognition, is and how it works, and more specifically how it is used by the City of Cape Town. As always, you are welcome to ask questions during or after the presentation. We have two people from the Safety and Security portfolio of the City of Cape Town as presenters who will explain the ANPR technology to us. Most of you should be familiar with the public figure of Alderman Jean-Pierre or JP Smith, the Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security. JP has been part of the Cape Town City Council since 2000. He represents an area that includes Sea Point, Green Point and Mooly Point. Since 2009, he is the Mayoral Committee Member responsible for Safety and Security, a really tough portfolio. In 2021, he was again elected to this position, which will run until 2026. The Safety and Security Directorate comprises of Metro Police, Traffic Services, Fire and Rescue, Law Enforcement, as well as several other components, including that of the support services as provided by the Neighbourhood Watches. Alderman JP Smith is a firm believer of technology as a tool to improve operational efficiency and has already pioneered several technological improvements within the service that was a first for South Africa. And something more personal, JP resides in the Hout Bay area, and while taking care of his parents, shares his home with an assortment of adopted cats and dogs which were rescued. Once an avid gamer, today he seldom gets a chance to compete with opponents in the online gaming arenas. The other presenter, Eckardt Winks, is the Executive Support Officer for Alderman JP Smith. Eckardt specialized in the technology sector of the private security industry and became involved with ANPR in 2017. After joining the office of Alderman Smith during 2021, Eckardt continues to share his technical and operational insight to the Directorate in support of Alderman Smith's vision of positioning the City of Cape Town as the leaders in South Africa for safety and security. We are really honored to have these two gentlemen as presenters today. So welcome again to both of you, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. It's over to you, Eckardt and JP. I don't know who's going first. You can unmute yourself.
So you asked us to speak to you about automated number plate recognition, and I thought I will focus on the presentation and just leave the video running while I introduce myself. I understand you did an introduction already. I'm responsible for safety and security. That's traffic, law enforcement, Metro Police, fire and emergency rescue services, disaster risk management, and the Public Emergency Communication Center, as well as the Form and Events Office and some other elements that we've added. We're constantly expanding our functionality, and digital evidence collection or evidence management and digital incident detection has become an increasingly larger part of our scope. And I'll wrap up on that just towards the end. In the meantime, I will focus on the presentation, and the issues that we're going to cover is the beginnings of LPR, where it started, how it works in very simple terms, the approach the city is taking to this, including our partnerships with the LPRUG, and the challenges in what we do and how we respond. Eckardt? If you can, thank you. So on the issue of the history of LPR, it has a history long before active use in South Africa, as far back as 1976. The Police Scientific Development Branch in Britain did things like this. In fact, we're taking a leaf out of their book in terms of starting to appoint staff who can drive scientific innovation and development in Cape Town. We have tried to embrace technology as rapidly as possible, but we are a long way behind many of the innovations that get used elsewhere, although we do try and be first in the pack in South Africa. So the 1981 had the first arrest after detecting a stolen motor vehicle, and in 1993, ANPR cameras became incorporated around the City of London after the terrorist bombings in the financial district. This project was called the Ring of Steel by them and undertaken by the Metropolitan Police Force, which was the largest of its time. So the LPR is fairly simple. I think in sometimes with one too many spy thriller under the belt, people may have all kinds of fanciful ideas how some of these technologies work. But the technology around LPR is pretty simple. There are cameras that are mounted around the city, both owned by the state, mainly by the City of Cape Town, and then some cameras owned by, a few cameras owned on some major roads by provincial government or their contractors, and the same with the city. And then a large number of cameras, an increasingly larger and more rapidly expanding number of cameras owned by the private sector, by Neighbourhood Watches, security companies, and that communities are installing. And these cameras detect the number plates. They read these number plates digitally, much as text recognition works on a document reader. And in lieu of that, they test that against a database of suspicious vehicles. And once there is a positive read, the location and an image of that vehicle is then transferred to the Neighbourhood Watches, traffic, law enforcement, Metro Police, SAPs, private security companies, and so forth. So, fairly simple. There is a vehicle traveling past a camera. The number plate, here partially obscured, is read, and that detection is then tested against a database that is developed and which contains the number plates of vehicles of interest, the VOI database, which is stolen vehicles, duplicate number plates, suspicious vehicles which have been involved in activities that have caused it to be placed on the watch list. And ultimately, an alert is sent out, usually in some form of automated messaging to the various responders, to community structures, to centralized WhatsApp groups run by the LPRUG and others, and increasingly something that the city is integrating into our control systems to ensure that all of our potential responders are seeing that as well. I see that we are drawing some questions. If we can deal with all those at the end, we can do that. But in short, the time frame response is very, very rapid, sometimes near instantaneous. Other than you must, of course, take the time to ensure, and this is covered later in the presentation, that that vehicle is correctly identified, that it's not a misread by the system, and that the vehicle is indeed one that is of interest, that it is a current entry, and that you are not looking at the wrong vehicle. So from the very source of the complaint, which is potentially in this case an example, a white Toyota Corolla with a particular number plate that is carjacked in Plumstead, a case number is opened. It's reported on various WhatsApp groups. The incident is received by the central LPRUG, License Plate Recognition User Group, WhatsApp group. And variations of this methodology are followed in different places. The intel is verified. In other words, who is the source, what additional information there is the vehicle license plate cloned or false or old, to make sure that you're not putting something on the database that's problematic. The single most important activity in all these processes is the verification of that data. And once that's all verified, the vehicle is loaded onto the vehicle of interest database. And of course, that is constantly reviewed, constantly checked. That is the value of the human intervention and the quality assurance that happens with this, because you can create major legal issues by pulling off the wrong vehicle or attempting to stop a vehicle where you have misidentified the vehicle. So it's absolutely critical that that database is accurate and current. And many times these kind of projects fall foul of loading vehicles that don't belong on such a vehicle of interest database and then incorrectly trying to stop such a vehicle. When that vehicle passes the camera, as we indicated before, there is then a detection. The control room gets an automated alert from the vehicle of interest database via a telegram, and it verifies that that alert is correct. So when you ask me how quickly does this happen, the answer is that it's only the time that is taken for that verification process, that double check, and then of course units are alerted, and those units can then make an arrest. And from quarter to quarter, we have very positive results on this. Between July and September last year, we had 15 suspects who were arrested through this process. In October, we had 26 arrests, with including hijacked vehicles, stolen vehicles, armed robbery, street robberies, ATM scammers, the CROWBAR gangs, and even for murder cases. In November, we had 24 incidents leading to 4 arrests, including kidnapping, and in December, 23 incidents with another 7 arrests. So these results are pretty continuous. The cameras are enormously valuable, and the LPR functionality makes it a much more effective and targeted tool. So this is a very simple process. The benefits of LPR, I think, are to most people quite self-evident. It is in 2 aspects. Firstly, is early warning, that you are detecting a vehicle that is of interest when the vehicle enters an area. And 2, after a crime has been committed, the ability to track that vehicle's movements around the city. And as the LPR network grows, increasingly the ability to track that vehicle wherever it moves around the city. Important then that the city ensures that these vehicles have number plates, and that we take stern action for vehicles without number plates, which is why you will see that in the city's traffic bylaw, which is about to be passed, and in the Provincial Traffic Act regulations that are about to go out for public participation, we are moving towards trying to impound vehicles that drive around without number plates. So those benefits of early warning involve the suspect vehicles being loaded onto the central database, which can either be completely central or it can have local subsets. The responders notified when a suspect vehicle passes one of the cameras, and this allows your responders then obviously to monitor and disrupt that vehicle before a crime can take place, or to stop the vehicle if it's wanted by an investigating officer. The benefits after the incident in terms of the investigation is obviously that these cameras are capturing and storing information on secure databases, which can then subsequently be used by the investigating officer to try and find out which vehicle was there, what did the vehicle do, where did the vehicle go afterwards. And after a vehicle's been used in the commission of a crime, that then gets loaded onto the central suspect vehicle database for monitoring, or with an instruction for an officer or for the vehicle to be stopped where the investigating officer has an interest in that vehicle. Then in terms of the partnerships with the license plate recognition user group, this is an incredibly important self-regulating community or sectoral body. The city has been in a close partnership with this license plate recognition users in the private sector. We signed a cooperation protocol in 2016 in the council meeting. This promotes us to have regular sharing of info and intelligence. We encourage and integrate and enhance the uses of the shared resources, make sure that we are optimally using that information, practice the principles of data integrity and data privacy, and to cooperate so that we ensure that we have an effective joint strategy to combat crime, and that we understand what it is that each component of that strategy must do. So what the LPRUG brings to the table is obviously its cameras and its people. that framework and self-regulation for responsible use, which I cannot underemphasize. I must say that this is an incredibly important element, and I will say more about this later on, specifically the responses from legal advisors in terms of the future of LPRUG, and that the LPRUG also carefully maintains the vehicle of interest database, which is the critical tool. The city and other policing agencies brings its cameras and its people, and of course its operations and technical desk. We have now created an LPR desk in our CCTV control room. The user group represents a number of organizations across Cape Town who have this common interest in terms of using the license plate recognition in an extended network that's not just trapped in one community, but where information is shared across neighborhood boundaries with each other to have achieve that single centralized database. It tries to promote and develop and improve the use of LPR camera technology and increase the effectiveness of that technology. But it does it within certain very tight strictures, because this is a heavily regulated area with a lot of legal consequences if you get it wrong. So it's a not-for-profit entity. It doesn't support any particular platform. Whatever platform you use, whether it's Navic or iTrack or whatever, you're able to work with them. What they just deal with is the database. The specific software is not the does not have to impact on the different users being part of this network, and they provide support to the LPR users. Those are members of the organization. They ensure the integrity of the use of the system, create that framework for fair and transparent exchange, build relationships, share knowledge, and of course, make sure that they act in the best long-term interest of all the stakeholders. And that revolves around the code of conduct of good practice. And that code of good practice is binding on all the members of the LPRUG. So in this way, the sector attempts to self-regulate, which is quite important. The organization that we signed this agreement with in 2016, they obviously have this governance framework in place. And through their members and their camera network now of around 1,500 LPR cameras and growing very rapidly, they filter and verify the information on vehicle-based crime and support the investigations and maintenance of the suspect vehicle database. And they feed real-time information to SAPs on suspect vehicle movements and also to the city's Metro Police Traffic and Law Enforcement. And we are in fact integrating that into the software, the computer-aided dispatching system called EPIC, which is integrated into our vehicles and which will increasingly make our services more professional. What they don't do is takedowns. That is for the police to do. Their role is to locate and to be the eyes only. And they obviously also do not use LPR data for private or commercial purposes. Don't supply information to private investigators or legal investigators or repossession companies and so forth. POPIA is very clear on what is and isn't permitted in this space. So if you look at a quick timeline from over the last decade, from 2012 till now, you'll see that there's been quite a lot of development. That forum was only launched in 2012. The LPRUG formalized in 2013. The vehicle of interest database on a central cloud established at the end of 2013. We signed the agreement with them at the end of 2015, and between 2016 and 2018, up through to 2019, there was an incredibly rapid growth of these systems across many communities and a lot deeper collaboration between them and the city and SAPs as we all found our place in this. 2021 sees the introduction of the POPIA Act, and this has major implications for all of us and criminal consequences if we get it wrong. And partly in response to that, in this year now, we are introducing a bylaw to regulate these CCTV cameras that surveil public space to make sure that the whole thing stays legal, because there are some threats emerging around the wrongful use of the system. And of course, we've now introduced the LPR desk at Metro Police, which will focus crime analysts on this and make sure that we increasingly intelligently engage through investigators and analysts on this with this data. So this has evolved a long way from just a handful of neighborhood watches that installed cameras to fight vehicle-based crime and share info. This has grown to a citywide organization that initially only ran its own cameras each individually, but now has a wide and collective membership across over 120 organizations. So a lot of growth over this last decade, and an increasing connectedness of the network that has really made it able or possible for us to start doing the things that we're now achieving it with, and some of the successes I read out early. The quality of information and the constant verification of that information has also built trust with SAPs and other responders, because it is very unlikely that SAPs and other policing responders will respond to information when they cannot have confidence that the alert that is being triggered is for a vehicle that is genuinely of interest and needs to be arrested. The worst thing that can happen is you engage in a wrongful arrest with people in a vehicle who are not related to the incident, and you can subsequently not prove that there was a justifiable reason for your policing action. And that's why the data quality is absolutely essential. So the net result of this is a very effective and very sophisticated network of people in cameras. And if you look at the distribution across the map, you can see where this has grown. It is now starting to take off, or there are LPRUG members outside of the City of Cape Town boundaries. And we obviously hope that this will continue to expand provincially and nationally. There are other networks at play as well that have also have a national footprint. And the long-term goal, of course, is to try and get all these to cooperate as best possible. And that will best be enabled by national legislation, but that currently is not in place yet. Just a few highlights from the results of our LPRUG work, or our work with license plate recognition cameras, that just since the last AGM of the license plate recognition user group, the city and them with SAPs have done more than 1,000 arrests. So this is in a little bit more than a year. 250 stolen or hijacked vehicles have been recovered, and more than 50 genuine or imitation firearms have been recovered that were used in the commission of a crime. So that's quite important. And the stats, I think, do speak for themselves. So the whole point here is to make sure that we all understand our common interest in making this work. My CROWBAR is your CROWBAR. This is a tool which, if we run it correctly, allows all of us to become very effective and to make the city very small for criminals if we all work together, that there's increasingly less places for people to hide. And where community cameras stop, city cameras must start on public networks. And that's why in a moment I will show you stats around how the city has increasingly started rolling out cameras that cover the dead spaces between where the community cameras end. Cape Town's license plate recognition functionality or use has really been driven from the ground up by communities. We've tried to create a one city approach, with the city very much running after that, trying to catch up and trying to support where needed. But this is a good example of a bottom-up approach. There are some challenges in terms of some of the commercial entities who obviously sell LPR technology, and some of that traps us a bit in different silos where you are restricted to the use of that technology in a particular within that system only, and that takes some users away from a shared network and actually does a great disservice to the whole mission that we have embarked on here. So very important not to let specific vendors of commercial products that are used to manage LPR cameras, not to let those vendors divide the license plate recognition users across the city and the province. Our view is that we should have the single suspect vehicle of interest database in the Western Cape, which different kinds of software can use. The specific software that a community or end user uses is not important in the greater scheme of things. So I think that the main reason for these results is that the databases, as I've said, is very tightly controlled. It's run by skilled investigators. It is actively maintained. The information is accurate, current, and actionable. And the responders, again, are tightly vetted, trained, and actively managed, and operate according to strict standard operating procedures. Information control and responder discipline is absolutely critical. The LPRUG is vulnerable to legal assault. There are operational actions every day that can become vulnerable to review. And if you don't keep a tight hand on this, this thing can easily become the subject of lawsuits and legal interdicts. So all of this has built a high level of trust between the different role players. There are risks, as I said, in what we in this process. One of those risks, of course, is social media leaks that can lead to civil claims, criminal charges. One leak can lead to a POPIA challenge that potentially severely impairs the whole LPR endeavor. Infiltration is a real risk. Access to alerts or a phone from the wrong person who can then intentionally or unintentionally leak information and expose responders and otherwise to risk. Vigilante action or simply poor choices, overexcitement or misunderstandings can lead to injury or a mortality. When a vehicle is confronted and there is an attempt to stop a vehicle, if that is inexpertly handled and by people who aren't suitably legally qualified to do that, their actions, while intended, constitute a criminal offense. If you arrest a person under circumstances where you are not legally entitled to do so, your arrest becomes a kidnapping or an abduction or an assault. So it is important that we also protect the members and that all the members manage this on a daily basis. We are trying to ensure that we manage the risks in conjunction with our partners. So the challenges that I think are emerging now is simply sustainability. The sheer size of this operation is becoming such, and the complicated nature of the legal environment means that we have to be far more careful with governance, policies, operating procedures, and agreements that underpin all this. If you are reckless with all of this, you can very easily end up in a great deal of legal challenge and criminal potential criminal prosecution. Those risks can be managed down if your information quality is good, if we secure the information so that we don't fall foul of the POPIA Act, and if you manage your responder behavior. So we can manage those risks. There is the big risk of commercialization, that some people will seek to monetize the data, and that's something communities must protect against very carefully. And of course, legality, we must make sure that we are constantly managing that legal environment, that we operate in the legal environment in terms of the code of conduct, and that we explain to our members what POPIA means, which of course brings me to an inevitable topic in relation to this now. If you are collecting data, you are within the ambit of the POPIA. The Act applies to precisely to what this whole endeavor does. In the legislation, there is an exemption only for state bodies operating for lawful grounds. The LPRUG, the License Plate Recognition User Group, is involved in discussions with the city, province, and SAPS legal. And we understand that civilians add huge value in this, but that civilian interaction must be managed. The information regulator has been approached for an ANPR code of conduct, and the License Plate Recognition User Group model that has developed has been discussed in terms of trying to influence that ultimate code of conduct. As I said, we're developing a policy and a bylaw to ensure that we manage the development of this sector in public spaces, that those who monitor public space are doing so for the right reasons, that they are audited and subject to potentially random audit, and that where cameras are not part of an accredited network or accredited users, that we remove those cameras from poles where they surveil public space. So we are trying to make sure that this sector is the value that it creates isn't undermined by the actions of a few who potentially engage in wrongdoing. So the city and the LPRUG and others are very actively representing the interest of this particular sector. I think most of you probably have a sense of POPIA and what it does. The Act requires that responsible parties must have lawful grounds for what they do, that they must process data in a specific way, in a very narrowly defined way for lawful purpose, that they must collect only what is necessary for specific purposes and only for as long as is needed, keep that data, and that the processes may not process or share that data outside of the process it was collected for, that we must define reasonably practical steps in ensuring that the information is accurate and not misleading. There must be a record of processing activities. The standard ROPA principles must apply, and only access to those who need it. I have been to, in previous days, to some of the other networks that run where members of the public have shown me with great glee their access to systems in their communities, and how a casual member of the public or person not directly involved is able to search for the movement of vehicles that is distinctly illegal, and can expose the operators of those networks to great legal risk. So we must make very sure that we manage this carefully. And that goes for the Telegram, WhatsApp, and other groups where this information is shared on. So there must be tight data processing agreements that govern this, and there must be a mechanism allowing notification of security compromises by operators. So when there is a suspected problem, there must be a system for reporting that quite rapidly. So in terms of the old CCTV policy, we were quite constrained. Initially, the only tool we had available to us is a policy that the city implemented, a CCTV policy that tried to represent the beginning framework for regulation. It didn't really cater for LPR camera systems. It didn't really cater for any of the new technology or advances that were being made. It focused very narrowly on neighborhood watches, SIDS, and community organizations, and didn't adequately monitor the increasing business usage, which has become a big challenge. There were a variety of shortcomings in that policy, most obvious of which is that it simply didn't initially reflect on POPI. It was pre-POPI, so it needs to incorporate those principles. And importantly, it needs to be enforceable. So as a policy of the city, it is binding on the city, but not legally enforceable on people outside. And that's why after a lot of engagement with province and others, we have over time established legal counsel and legal opinion that says that the city is the right entity to drive the creation of a bylaw to regulate this. So we, in terms of our relationship with the LPRUG, we are fully behind this group. We have a formal MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with them. We have 250 LPR cameras, which ties into their network, and we're continuing to grow it. After July this year, or starting with July this year, there will be a massive and very aggressive expansion of our CCTV camera footprint. Our new mayor has thrown a lot of money towards this, but there's also the rollover of a huge amount of money that the previous mayor, Dan Plato, invested in this, which will very substantially add to our camera footprint, and will add to those cameras that we've installed over the last 18 months in Ottery Park, Grassy Park, Lotus River, Philippi, Tafelsig, Lentigeur, Mitchells Plain. And we will also start looking at cameras now along that Baden-Powell corridor, and to build on the existing cameras in hotspots like Nyanga and others. So we are focused on growing our camera network, and we're also developing operational centers in our Metro Police and in our radio dispatch center to support these actions, to integrate the detections into our automated systems, so that on the handheld and in-vehicle enablement systems of the officers, such detections will immediately register. And that's a very important innovation and evolution that we have long wanted to do, but not had the means to do it. And that is now, that process is now starting. The license plate recognition user group did activate an advocate, and they asked the advocate some questions around LPR and the legality of the issues. And I thought that there were two comments from the legal advisor that was worthwhile sharing. Aside from acknowledging that the citizenry of our country can make a huge contribution to the fight against crime, and that while the role is important, the legal advice is that we must be very circumspect about the legal limitations of what we can do and how we execute those functions. And LPR is an important investigative tool, and the fact that civilians are helping to drive it adds great value. but we must also make sure that we protect those who are involved in this process. So there are two questions that I think are useful for you to reflect on, and maybe I don't need to go into them into a lot of detail, other than just to share with you that there are cogent answers for these two questions, which are ones you're going to be most frequently asked. Under what circumstances in our LPR work may a civilian get involved in stopping, blocking a vehicle without SAPs? And what are the potential consequences if somebody operates outside of their mandate? And that brings us to the first of the two questions, namely that Section 42 of the Criminal Procedures Act governs the issue of what a civilian may do. It does give a private person in the authority to arrest a person who commits or attempts to commit an offence referred to in Schedule 1, but the limitation there is it must happen in his presence. So Schedule 1 limits the private person's involvement to very specific crimes. There's a reasonability caveat that says that when you see somebody screaming and trying to chase down somebody who's robbed them, or pointing at a fleeing individual saying he just stole my bag, there is then a reasonable opportunity for you to get involved, but you must observe the offence. And the problem here, of course, is that LPR relates to past events. And so that would legally be considered to be hearsay and would not be covered by the powers that Section 42 of the Criminal Procedure Act provides. So stopping, blocking a vehicle, the progress of a vehicle would be considered a de facto detention, and that's not allowed unless you have the legal power to do so. So that private security companies have very distinct limitations in terms of their role here. And SAPS should not be instructing somebody to do that on their behalf. The SAPS member may not necessarily understand the limitations of the powers of the private individual, and all will go well until you have that one incident where somebody is seriously hurt or maimed, or there is a death, and then the legal consequences can become very serious. And in terms of the potential consequences for a private person, again, Section 42 recognizes the crime-fighting value of citizenry, and the citizen has certain rights included in that process, and we're trying to inculcate a social responsibility within our communities. And the CPA does provide some guidelines that offers protection to a private person. But if you disregard the Section 42, you do put your life and the life of your partners at risk. You expose yourself or your organization to vicarious liability in response to civil action by others. You expose yourself to potential criminal prosecution, and you put a potential criminal prosecution at risk with a person perhaps being acquitted because of wrongful actions taken along the way. There is a lot of more work that is going to be done. We have quite an ambitious program of action ahead of us between the city and the license plate recognition community. We've started training dispatchers at our radio control room, and we're in the process of setting up our own local response groups with SAPS and city resources to respond to the alerts, and integrating our Cyclops and Eagle Eye CCTV control room. So there's a lot tighter cohesion being developed and developing all the time. We've also have a request in with the Executive Director for Safety and Security for a dedicated LPR team consisting of 37 uniformed staff in the Metropolitan Police Department. So we're constantly growing dedicated resources to support this endeavor. We will concentrate on the camera alerts, number plate compliance, and vehicles driving on old plates and clone plates. And I must tell you that as somebody in safety and security who has seen what the state brings to the party and what civil society brings to the party, I am enormously grateful to the crime-fighting community policing structures, most specifically the Neighbourhood Watches, but also our CPFs, and very specifically these members of the LPRUG for the enormous amount of energy and passion they have put into this. And we are not stopping our efforts. We have a lot of further developments coming out. We're integrating our average speed over distance cameras on our highways and rolling out more of them. They all have LPR fitted to them. We are fitting them in all of our traffic vehicles. The dash cams, dashboard cameras of these vehicles will all be LPR enabled over the next couple of years. We've already started that process, and the real-time alerts being embedded into our system to ensure that they form part of our dispatching. We're insourcing the camera monitoring in our CCTV control rooms. So increasingly cameras will be monitored by people recruited from communities with a genuine passion for this, and not people who are at arm's length removed. And we are improving the local legislation to make sure that we can compel compliance with vehicles having number plates on, and that there are serious consequences for not having a number plate on your vehicle. And Johan, with that, that's the extent of my presentation. I know it's a little bit on the longer side, but I did want to share all the issues with you. It's a broad topic. It has had a lot of development, and I hope that what I presented has been of interest. And just a acknowledgement to the LPRUG, some of the content that I've shared, some of the graphics were produced by them. So my special thanks to Susan Smith, no relation, and to Henry Giddy and the many passionate people within that community who do tremendously good work. Thank you.
JP, thank you for a very, very comprehensive presentation. I actually think you've addressed most of the questions that I saw there. Maybe I've got one that's slightly different. You know, as a law-abiding citizen, or most of us hopefully are, I thought this technology will also be used to stop vehicles with outstanding traffic fines. Is that part of the strategy? Absolutely.
Johan, the Vehicles of Interest database focuses on crime prevention aspects, but obviously the city's specific interest with all of our traffic vehicles and Metro Police and law enforcement vehicles, those dash cams are going to focus very much on vehicles with outstanding warrants for all manner of offense, not just traffic offenses, any other offenses linked to a name that is linked to that vehicle. So yes, this is an aspect which over this term of office, by the end of this 5 years, is going to be critically embedded in our operations. And I think it will start creating far more meaningful consequence for traffic offenders.
Thanks, JP. Maybe just one or two of those questions. The one was, are there cameras in the Overberg areas? You did present a map. I think we can go back in the recording to find that. And then another question was also more about, I assume, local community cameras, for instance, in Helderberg College Road. Question from Les, but I don't know if you've got those specifics, because that's close to where we all are.
So Helderberg has extensive camera networks, and I'm sure somebody else can perhaps better fill you in on exactly where those are. But Helderberg as a community has been very proactive in terms of building CCTV and LPR networks, and there might be others on this presentation who can better speak to that. And I've seen the camera networks expand in Hermanus and Onrus, and on the other side of the municipal boundary increasingly. And of course, there are the ASOD cameras that lead out of Cape Town as you go over Salaris Pass. Province has some ASOD cameras.
Thanks, JP. We won't keep you longer. Thanks. We really appreciate your time to talk to us, and to Eckardt also for his part of preparing the presentation. We really appreciate it, and I'll send you the link of the recording if you want to maybe use it for a next group. Thank you very much. We appreciate your work and your time today.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to ask you for the location of that virtual waterfall behind you. It looks like a nice place to escape.
It's only in the Helderberg, man. You must just come and visit us more.
Absolutely, sir. I'm actually there tonight. I'm joining the Strand Neighbourhood Watch tonight.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure some of our members might be involved to that. You're welcome to go now. We're just going to close the meeting with a few administrative things. But once again, thank you, and thanks to Eckardt as well.
Thank you, Master Alderman.